Do not drink that." The words were scarcely a breath, spoken so close to his ear that Ambrose Vane, 7th Duke of Nordham, felt them stir the fine hairs at his collar before he understood them as speech at all. He had lifted the glass. The crystal had already caught the light of 100 candles and thrown it back in a shiver of gold, and his mouth had already parted to receive the wine that Lord Fenwick's grand autumn ball demanded of every guest of consequence. He was a guest of the greatest consequence in the room, and so the toast had been for him, and so the glass had been pressed into his hand with ceremony, and so a great many pairs of eyes were watching to see the Duke of Nordham drink. And then, before the rim touched his lip, a hand closed over his forearm. It was not a bold hand, it trembled. He felt the tremor of it through the wool of his sleeve, and he felt the smallness of the fingers, and in the half-second that a man's whole life sometimes hinges upon, he turned his head and looked down into a face he did not know. She was no one. That was his first thought, uncharitable and instantaneous, the reflex of a man who had spent 39 years being approached by people who wanted something. A young woman in a gown of grey muslin gone soft at the seams from too many washings, a gown that had been made for someone else and taken in without skill, fair hair pinned up in haste, a curl already escaping at her temple. A face too pale, too plain by the merciless standard of that gilded room, with a wide anxious mouth and eyes that were fixed on the glass in his hand as though it were a coiled adder. "Forgive me, Your Grace, forgive me, but you must not drink it." He might have shaken her off. A duke learns early that the world is full of the mad and the desperate, and that both attach themselves to power the way ivy attaches itself to stone. He might have said something cold and turned his shoulder and drunk the wine to spite her, for Ambrose Vane was a man made largely of spite in those years, spite being the last warmth left in a house where every other fire had gone out. He might have done any of these things. Instead, he watched her eyes. They had not moved from the glass. There was no cunning in them, no petition, none of the sidelong hunger he had learned to read in a lifetime of being wanted. There was only fear, a plain, animal, human fear. It was fear on his behalf. He could not remember the last time anyone had been afraid for him rather than of him, so he lowered the glass an inch, and in that inch the young woman moved. Whether she meant to take the glass from him gently and thought better of it, or whether her nerve simply broke, he never afterward decided. Her hand darted, caught the stem, and knocked. The crystal tipped. A dark tongue of wine leapt out and struck the front of his waistcoat, ran down the pale silk in a stain like old blood, and the glass itself struck the parquet and burst into 100 bright fragments that skated away beneath the shoes of the astonished dancers. The music did not stop all at once. It faltered, a violin sawing into silence, then a cello, then the whole ragged company of strings, until the ballroom held only the last echo of a spilled glass and the collective indrawn breath of 200 people who had just watched a shabby nobody assault the Duke of Nordham with his own wine. "Good God," said Lord Fenwick, surging forward, his heavy face gone from wine flush to fury. "Seize her. Seize that woman at once." 2 footmen came. The girl did not run. That was the thing Ambrose would turn over afterward in the long watches of the night she'd not run, though every door stood open to her and every eye condemned her. She stood in the wreckage of the glass with her chin up and her hands now folded before her, trembling still, and she looked not at the footman closing on her but at him, only at him, as though was the only judgment in the room that signified. "Hold," said the Duke. He did not raise his voice. He had never in his adult life needed to raise his voice. The vain fortune had bought, 3 generations back, the kind of authority that travels at a whisper. The footman stopped. Lord Fenwick's mouth worked. And into the ringing quiet the Duke set down the empty stem of the glass upon a passing tray, unhurried, and looked at the ruin of his waistcoat, and then he looked at the girl. "You have spoiled a very good waistcoat," he said. "Yes, Your Grace." Her voice shook, but she did not look away. "I am aware of it. And you did so deliberately." A hesitation. Then yes. Why? The whole room strained to hear it. He was aware of that of Fenwick, of the ranked matrons with their fans arrested at their chins, of the young bloods smirking already, composing the story they would tell at their clubs tomorrow. The mad girl and the wine, the Duke of Nordham drenched by a pauper. He was aware that whatever she said next would be repeated in 100 drawing rooms by noon, and that if she said something absurd he would be a laughingstock, and that a lifetime of careful cold consequence could unravel in a single foolish sentence spoken by a stranger in grey muslin. She said, "Because there is oil of nightshade in it, your grace," or something very like. I saw it put there. The word fell into the room like a stone into a still pond. Nightshade. The rings of it spread outward, whisper on whisper, and Fenwick's ruddy face went a curious shade of putty, and somewhere a woman gave a small stifled cry. Ambrose Vane did not move. He had learned long ago that in the instant a thing becomes dangerous, the man who moves least commands most. So he stood very still in his ruined waistcoat and considered the girl, and considered the impossibility of what she said, and considered this was the thing that arrested him, the way she had said it, not with the relish of the fantasist, not with the fluttering of the attention-starved. She had said it the way a person says a hard fact they would give anything not to know. "You saw it put there," he repeated. "By whom? I do not know his name. A man in green livery." "Not Lord Fenwick's livery. I have served here 3 seasons, and I know the house colours, and green is not among them." He came from the passage behind the card room, and he had the glass ready on a salver, and he poured a little something into it from a small dark bottle, and then he gave it to the footman who carried it to you. Her breath caught. I tried to reach a footman. No one would hear a chambermaid. So I came myself. Forgive me, there was no time to be believed. Chambermaid, so that was what she was. He looked again at the muslin gone grey with washing, at the raw knuckles of the hands folded before her, at the pallor that he now understood was not the pallor of ill-breeding but of a servant who worked below stairs and rarely saw the sun. A chambermaid had crossed the length of Lord Fenwick's ballroom, in full view of the flower of 3 counties, to spill a duke's wine, and very likely to be turned off without a character, and possibly to be gaoled, it because she believed his life was in that glass. He turned to Fenwick. "Have the glass taken up," he said, "all of it, and the wine that's spilled have a cloth pressed to the stain and kept. I will want them looked at by a man who knows poisons. Your Grace, surely you cannot credit the ravings of our—" "I credit," said the Duke, in a voice that closed the subject like a door, "that I would sooner ruin a waistcoat than be buried in one. Have it done." Fenwick had it done. Men of Fenwick's stamp always had it done in the end. They blustered and they yielded, and the yielding was the truer note. The fragments were gathered onto a salver. The wet cloth was folded and set aside. And through all of it the girl in grey stood in the cleared circle of the floor, alone as Ambrose Vane had spent a lifetime being alone in the middle of crowded rooms, and he found that he could not stop looking at her. "What is your name?" he said. "Wren, your Grace." "Wren Alderley." "A bird's name. My mother's fancy, your Grace. She said I came early and small and would not be still." A ghost of something crossed her face, not quite a smile, too frightened for a smile, but the memory of one. "I have not much improved." Against every instinct of a lifetime, the Duke of Nordham felt the corner of his own mouth move. He suppressed it. There were 200 people watching, and the habit of stone was very old in him. But he had felt it, the small treacherous warmth of it, and he distrusted it profoundly, and he could not for the life of him look away from Wren Alderley. "Come with me," he said. "You will tell me the whole of it, away from these good people who are so eager to see you hanged." A murmur ran the room. Fenwick began to protest that his own footman could deal with the creature, that there was no need to trouble his Grace, that surely— "She is under my protection," said the Duke, and the word protection went through the room like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath, because it was a word the Duke of Nordham had not extended to any living soul in the memory of anyone present. He held out his arm to a chambermaid in grey muslin, in front of the assembled nobility of 3 counties, and after a startled instant in which she plainly did not know whether it was a trap, Wren Alderley laid her trembling hand upon his sleeve. They walked out of the ballroom together through a corridor of staring faces. He felt her fingers tighten on his arm as they passed the worst of the matrons, and he did a thing then that he did not examine until much later, alone. He laid his own gloved hand over her small cold one where it rested on his sleeve, and he kept it there, and he did not let go. The card room stood empty, its green baize tables abandoned, a single branch of candles guttering. He drew out a chair for her, which visibly astonished her, and when she would not sit until he did, he understood that she had spent her whole life on her feet in the presence of people like him, and he sat so that she might. Now, he said, the man in green livery. Describe him. Tall. Older, grey at the temples, a long face and a scar here. She touched her own left cheekbone, below the eye, and he moved like a servant who had once been a soldier, straight-backed, quick and quiet. Ambrose Vane went cold to the marrow and had nothing to do with the wine drying on his waistcoat. He knew that man. Grey at the temples, a scar below the left eye, the bearing of a soldier turned servant. There was only one man in England who answered that description and who might have reason to wish the Duke of Nordham dead, and he was not, strictly speaking, a stranger. He was Ambrose's own cousin's man, which meant that Ambrose's own cousin had sent him. Tell me everything, the Duke said very quietly, from the beginning. Leave nothing out. And Miss Alderley, she looked up, startled again at the address, at being called Miss by a Duke. You saved my life tonight. I do not forget debts. Whatever befalls you now, you will not face it alone. You have my word, and my word has never yet been broken. For the first time since she had seized his arm, the fear went out of Ren Alderley's eyes, and something else came into them, something that made the guarded Duke of Nordham feel, absurdly, as though the guttering candles had burned suddenly brighter. She believed him. No one, he realized, had looked at him with simple belief in more years than he could count. From the beginning, then, she said, and she began. She told it plainly, without ornament, and that too he marked, for the tellers of tall tales cannot resist ornament, and she resisted it entirely. She had been carrying a stack of clean linen along the servants' passage, she said, when she saw the man in green through the half-open door of the little pantry behind the card-room. He had his back half to her and a salver before him with a single glass upon it, and she would have thought nothing of it. A footman preparing a glass is the least remarkable sight in a great house, except that he did not move like a footman of the house. He glanced twice at the door. He listened. And then he took a small dark bottle from inside his coat, unstoppered it with his teeth because both his hands were occupied, and let 3 drops fall into the wine, and then he wiped the mouth of the bottle on his sleeve and put it away and stoppered it. And all of it done in the manner of a man who had done such things before and did not care to be seen doing them. A footman fetches wine, Wren said. He does not hide to add to it, and he does not carry his own bottle. I have laid a great many trays in 3 seasons, your grace. I know how a glass is prepared, and that was not it. And then he carried the salver out to the head of the passage, and gave it to Thomas, one of the real footmen, and told him it was Lord Fenwick's own vintage, brought up special for the toast to your grace, and Thomas took it and went in with it, because why should Thomas doubt him? He was in livery. He belonged, or seemed to. I stood in the passage with my arms full of sheets, and I did not know what to do. Her hands twisted together on the green baize. I am a chambermaid. If I ran to the housekeeper, she would send me back to my work and box my ears for leaving it. If I stopped a footman, he would not hear me. And there was the toast being called, and the glass going in, and she stopped. Forgive me. There was no clean way to do it, so I did it the only way that would work. You made a spectacle, said the Duke. I made a spectacle. She lifted her chin. I would do it again. He believed that too. He rose and crossed to the tall dark window and looked out at nothing, at his own reflection floating pale against the November night, at the ruined stain across his waistcoat that a stranger's courage had put there in place of a grave. Behind that reflection, in the black glass, he could see the shape of his own thoughts assembling themselves into an accusation he did not want to make. Grey at the temples, a scar below the left eye, a soldier's carriage. The man was called Dutton. Sergeant Dutton he had been in another life, before he came into the service of Ambrose's cousin Julian Reed. Julian, who was the son of the late Duke's younger brother. Julian, who stood next in the line of succession to Nordham for as long as Ambrose remained unmarried and childless. Julian, who had been 10 years living beyond his means and further beyond his patience, and who had spent the last 2 seasons in a state of barely masked resentment that his rich cousin persisted, so inconveniently, in continuing to draw breath. Ambrose had known Julian resented him. He had not until this moment understood that Julian meant to kill him. There is a great distance between the two, and he had crossed it in the space of a spilled glass, and he found he did not stagger. He was in a cold, clear way that surprised him, almost glad. For years he had felt the world to be a shapeless grey grievance, a fog of half-suspected slights. Now the fog had a shape and a name, and a man can fight a name. "Miss Alderley," he said, still to the window, "do you know who I am, beyond the title? You are the Duke of Nordham." A pause. "They say," she stopped. "Say it. They say below stairs that you are the coldest man in England, that you dismissed your whole household when you came into the title, and would keep no servant who had known you as a boy, that you have not danced in 6 years, that you buried a wife and never spoke her name after." Her voice was very quiet. "That is what they say. I do not know if it is true. I only know what I saw tonight." He turned from the window. It was, every word of it, true, and hearing it laid out so simply by a chambermaid was a stranger sensation than he could have predicted. He had built his cold reputation deliberately, brick by brick, in the years after Cassandra died, because a man who feels nothing cannot be hurt, and he had wanted more than anything else in the world never to be hurt again, and it had worked. He had made himself into stone, and the world had obliged by treating him as stone, and he had passed 6 years in the excellent safety of being feared and untouched, and a girl in grey muslin had walked across a ballroom and touched him anyway. "Some of it is true," he said. "Not all. But that is a conversation for another night, and there will not be another night unless we are clever now. Listen to me, Miss Alderley. The man you saw is called Dutton. He is not a stranger to me. He is the servant of a man I have reason to trust less than I trusted this evening's wine. If I am right, then tonight was one attempt, and where there has been one attempt there will be others, and they will be cleverer, because clever men learn. Do you understand what I am telling you?" She had gone very still. "You are telling me that someone wishes you dead, and that they will try again." "I am telling you," he said, "that you are the only person in England who saw it done, and who can name the hand that did it, which makes you from this hour a danger to that man. And men who will poison a duke do not scruple at a chambermaid." The colour left her face entirely, and he was sorry for it, and he did not soften it, because to soften it would have been a cruelty greater than the truth. She had earned the truth. She had earned it at the price of her livelihood and quite possibly her neck. "Then I have undone myself," she said low, "by speaking." "You have undone yourself by being decent," said the Duke, "which is a thing this world punishes more reliably than any crime. But you have not undone yourself past mending, because you did it in front of me, and I am not without resources." He came back to the table and stood over her, and he chose his next words with more care than he had chosen any words in years. "You cannot go back below stairs in this house tonight. Fenwick would turn you off by morning to spare himself the scandal, and Dutton or whoever employs him will know exactly where to find you. You have no character now, and no place and no protection but mine, so I will give you mine, formally, tonight. Your Grace, you will come into my service. Nordham House in town and Nordham Court in the country. I will settle upon you a wage that will make your eyes water, and a room that locks, and my personal word that no harm will come to you while you are under my roof. In exchange you will do 2 things. You will tell me everything you can remember about tonight over and over until we have wrung it dry, and you will remain within my protection until the man who wants me dead is unmade. Do you agree?" She stared at him. He watched her turn it over, watched the suspicion in her, the servant's ingrained certainty that when the great offer the small a bargain, the small always lose by it. He respected the suspicion. He would have distrusted her if she had lacked it. "Why?" she said at last. "Forgive me, but why would a duke trouble himself so, over a chambermaid? You could pay Thomas to forget he ever carried the glass. You could pay Fenwick to say I was drunk. You could let me be turned off, and it would cost you nothing, and no one would ever ask, why this?" It was the right question, and she had asked it, and he honoured her for it by answering it honestly, which he had meant to do and now found difficult. "Because," said the Duke of Nordham, and stopped, and began again, "because you were afraid for me. Do you understand how rare that is in my life? People fear me. People want my money and my name and my favour. No one in 6 years has looked at me across a room and been afraid on my behalf. You did not know me. You will get nothing by me, or so you had every reason to think when you crossed that floor. You spilled a glass in the face of the whole world and made yourself a beggar to keep a stranger from a poison he did not even believe in yet. He drew a breath. A man who lets that be repaid with a boxed ear, and the road is not a man. He is a thing shaped like a man. And whatever else they say of me below stairs, I would rather not be that. The silence in the card room was long, the candles guttered. From beyond the door came the muffled resumption of the ball, the strings finding their way back into a waltz, the world reassembling itself around the small crack that Wren Alderley had struck in it. Then I agree, she said. And I thank you. And your grace, she rose, and though she was small and grey and plain and had wept a little without letting the tears fall, she stood before him with a dignity that the ballroom full of jewelled women could not have matched. I did not do it to be repaid. I want you to know that. I would have done it if you had been the poorest man in the room, but I am not too proud to be glad of a locking door. No, said Ambrose Vane, and felt the warmth again, the treacherous warmth, and this time did not entirely put it out. Nor you be. Come. My carriage is at the door, and we have a great deal to do, and very little time in which to do it before my cousin learns his wine went into my waistcoat instead of my grave. He offered his arm a second time that night. She took it a second time. And as they went out together into the cold to the astonishment of Fenwick's footman, the Duke of Nordham reflected, with the part of his mind that was always watching himself from a little distance, that he had come to this ball an hour ago expecting nothing but a tedious evening and a headache. And he was leaving it with a poisoner to hunt, a cousin to unmask, and a chambermaid on his arm whom he had known for the space of a spilled glass, and would apparently, he now understood, defend with his life. It was the most alive he had felt since Cassandra died. He was too honest a man not to notice it. He was too guarded a man not to be alarmed by it. He handed Wren Alderley up into the dark warmth of the Nordham carriage, and climbed in after her, and rapped the roof, and the horses leaned into the traces, and the great house of Lord Fenwick fell away behind them, blazing with light and rumour, into the November dark. Nordham House stood tall and dark on a square in the best part of town, a great pale stone box of a house that had never in Ambrose's tenure felt like anything but a very expensive tomb. He watched Wren Alderley take it in as they came up the steps the marble hall, the twin staircases curving up into shadow, the ancestors glowering down out of their gilt frames, and he watched her not gape at it, which surprised him, until he remembered that she had spent her life in great houses. She knew the machinery of them. She knew the cold marble and the warm kitchens and the whole invisible army it took to keep the machinery turning. She was only seeing this one from the wrong side of the green baize door for the first time. Mrs. Pruett, he said to the housekeeper, who had risen from her bed at the sound of the carriage and stood now in the hall with a shawl over her nightgown and a candle in her hand and a great many questions in her face. This is Miss Alderley. She has done me a service tonight that I will not describe to you, and she is to be treated as a guest of this house and not as a servant of it. Give her the blue room in the east wing. It locks. See that she has whatever she wants, and that a woman sleeps in the dressing room adjoining. If anyone asks after her, anyone at all, and I mean anyone, you will know nothing and say less. Is that understood? Mrs. Pruett, who had served 3 Dukes of Nordham and was not easily astonished, was astonished. But she had also served 3 Dukes of Nordham and knew when a thing was not to be questioned, and she inclined her head and took her candle and led Wren away up the stairs, and at the turn of the stair Wren looked back at him once, and he lifted a hand. And then she was gone into the dark of the house. He did not sleep. He had not truly expected to. He shut himself in the library with the fire built up and a cold supper he did not touch, and he set himself to think, methodically, as he had once been taught to think by a hard old tutor, who had believed that a nobleman's chief weapon was his mind, and had been proven right by a great many noblemen who had lost their heads for want of one. Julian Reed wanted him dead. Very well. It was not, when he made himself examine it without the softening of family feeling, a surprising thing. Julian was heir presumptive. Julian was poor in the way that only a man raised to expect wealth and denied it can be poor, which is a poverty of the spirit more corrosive than any lack of coin. Julian had gambled and lost and gambled again to recover the loss. and lost that too, in the great remorseless spiral by which weak men convince themselves that ruin is a run of ill luck that must surely turn. And standing between Julian and the salvation of the entire Nordham fortune was one man, in excellent health, 39 years old, who might live another 40 years and who might, worse, marry and get an heir and end Julian's hopes forever. Ambrose had never intended to marry again. He had said so coldly to more than one hopeful mamma. And in that lay a bitter little irony, for his very determination to remain solitary had been, in a way, Julian's only comfort, the guarantee that the title would come to him at last, if he only outlived a cousin who showed no sign of endangering the succession with a wife. Something must have changed. Something must have frightened Julian into moving now, tonight, with poison, when a patient man might simply have waited. The Duke rose and went to his writing desk and drew out a letter that had come 3 days ago and that he had read once with irritation and set aside. It was from his man of business, Mr. Hale, and it concerned, he saw it now, with cold clarity, the very thing. Ambrose had, a fortnight past, instructed Hale to begin the settling of certain estates and moneys not on any prospective wife or child, for he had none, but upon a charitable foundation for the widows and orphans of soldiers, to be established in Cassandra's name. It was the first generous impulse he had permitted himself in 6 years, and it would have removed, at a stroke, a very great deal of money forever from the reach of any future Duke of Nordham. Julian would have heard of it. Julian heard of everything. He kept his ear to the ground the way a starving man keeps his ear to a granary wall. And Julian, seeing the fortune he had waited half a lifetime to inherit begin to bleed away into a charity for dead soldiers' orphans, had done his sums and concluded that he could not afford to wait any longer. "You have poisoned your own wine, cousin," Ambrose said aloud to the empty library, "by making me generous." He did not smile. There was nothing in it to smile at, but there was, in the naming of the thing, a grim satisfaction, and beneath the satisfaction, unwelcome and undeniable, there was the memory of a small cold hand on his arm and a voice saying, "Do not drink that." And he understood that if Wren Alderley had not been carrying linen down the wrong passage at the wrong moment, he would be, at this hour, a cooling body in the card-room of Lord Fenwick. And Julian Reed would be the 8th Duke of Nordham, and no one would ever have known it was murder. He owed her his life. He had said so, and he had meant it as men mean such things, as a debt of honour to be discharged with money and protection. But sitting alone in the small hours with the fire dying, he understood that it was more than a debt. She had not merely saved his life. She had, by the simple fact of caring whether he lived, reminded him that his life was a thing worth caring about, which was a gift he had not received in 6 years and had not known he still wanted. In the morning he sent for Mr. Hale, and for a discreet physician named Grierson, who had once quietly served the Crown in matters requiring both medical knowledge and silence. Grierson took away the folded cloth and the fragments of glass in a leather case, and returned 2 days later with his verdict, delivered in the flat voice of a man who has seen too much to be moved by any of it. "Belladonna," he said. "The tincture, concentrated. Not the sloppy work of a poisoner who wants to be sure of a slow death and doesn't much care how. This was measured. 3 or 4 drops in a full glass, no more, enough to stop a man's heart within the hour, and enough to be mistaken, by a careless physician at a crowded ball, for an apoplexy or a seizure of the heart. A man of your age, your grace, no wife, no children, dies suddenly at a party. It would have been written down as a stroke and buried within the week. Whoever did this knew exactly how much to use, and knew that the appearance of it mattered as much as the fact. "A professional," said Ambrose. "A professional," Grierson agreed. "Or a very careful amateur who took excellent advice. The distinction hardly matters to the corpse." He snapped his case shut. "You are alive because someone spilled it. I would find that someone, your grace, and I would keep them very close. They have better eyes than your footman and a steadier nerve than most men I've soldiered with." "I intend to," said the Duke. He did not tell Grierson that the someone was, at that moment, sitting in the morning room of Nordham House with a book she had not opened in her lap, watching the door. He had gone to her each morning of those 2 days, and each morning he had found her a little less like the trembling wraith of the ballroom and a little more like herself, and each morning he had stayed a little longer than the business of the matter strictly required. He learned things about her. Sitting in the morning room with the pale winter light coming in, he learned that she was the orphaned daughter of a country apothecary, which explained the nightshade she had grown up among the jars and the tinctures, had helped her father grind and measure and label them, had known the smell and the look of a dozen poisons before she was 10 years old, because an apothecary's child learns early which of the pretty jars will kill. He learned that her father had died of a fever when she was 15 and her mother the winter after, and that there had no money, only debts, and that a 15-year-old girl with an education too good for service, and no fortune to make it useful had gone into service anyway, because the alternative was worse. He learned that she had taught herself Latin from her father's pharmacopoeia and French from a discarded novel, and that she was ashamed of neither and boastful of neither, but simply carried her learning the way she carried everything, quietly, folded small, out of the way. "You are not what you appear," he told her on the second morning. "Nor are you," said Renalderly, and looked at him steadily and did not lower her eyes, and the Duke of Nordham, who had made a career of being unreadable, felt himself read. On the third day, Julian Reed came to call. He came in the middle of the afternoon, unannounced but not unexpected, for Ambrose had been expecting him since the moment Grierson said belladonna. A murderer who believes his murder has miscarried must learn quickly whether he is suspected, and there is no better way to learn it than to look his intended victim in the eye and see what looks back. So Julian came in a bottle green coat cut a season too fashionable for a man of his means, with his handsome dissolute face arranged into the mask of cousinly concern, and Ambrose received him in the great cold drawing-room and offered him nothing to drink, which was a small cruelty that gave him more pleasure than it should have. "Cousin," said Julian, taking both of Ambrose's hands in a warmth Ambrose knew to be entirely counterfeit. "I came the instant I heard. The whole town is full of it that some madwoman flung wine at you at Fenwick's ball and shrieked about poison. Are you quite well? You must have been terribly shaken. What a dreadful, dreadful business." "I am very well," said Ambrose. "Thank you for your concern. It touches me. They are saying the strangest things, that you took the creature away with you, that you have her still. Ambrose, forgive me, but is that wise? A woman who behaves so is plainly deranged, and to keep a deranged stranger under your roof one hears such stories she might do you a mischief. You must let me help you be rid of her. I know men who deal in these matters discreetly. A private asylum. It could all be very quiet." And there it was. Ambrose watched his cousin's face as he said it, watched the eagerness that Julian could not quite keep out of his eyes. The eagerness of a man who wants very badly for a particular witness to be made to vanish behind a locked door in a private madhouse where no magistrate would ever think to ask her questions. It was so nakedly, transparently what it was that Ambrose felt an odd remote pity for him. Julian had never been clever. He had only ever been desperate, and desperation apes cleverness poorly. "How kind," said Ambrose. "But there is no need. The woman is gone. I gave her a coin for trouble and had her put out at the corner the same night. A drunken maidservant, nothing more. She babbled some nonsense about a bottle and I dare say half of it was gin. I have quite forgotten her." He let a beat pass, and then, watching, the waistcoat was Weston's finest and quite ruined, which is the only true casualty of the evening. "I confess I was more vexed about the waistcoat than the wine." He saw the relief go through Julian like water through sand. Saw the shoulders drop, the breath ease, the mask of concern relax into something nearer the truth, a man reassured that the one person who could hang him had been turned out drunk into the street and forgotten. It was masterfully done, Ambrose thought, watching himself do it from that cold high place from which he always watched. He had lied to his cousin's face with such flat conviction that Julian believed it utterly, and in believing it, betrayed himself utterly, for an innocent man does not sag with relief to hear that the witness to nothing has been dismissed. "Well," said Julian, recovering his ease, becoming expansive, becoming now that he thought himself safe, almost pleasant. "That is a mercy. A great house is no place for hysterical women. You did right to be rid of her. And it puts me in mind, Ambrose, while I am here I wonder if I might trouble you on a small matter of business. A temporary embarrassment, nothing to signify. A few thousand would see me right, and I would repay it the instant. I heard," said Ambrose, "that you had gambling debts." Julian's smile stiffened. Trifles, gentlemen's debts. Everyone. I heard they were rather more than trifles. I heard that Verrall holds your paper for £11,000 and that he is not a patient man. He watched the blood leave his cousin's face. I make it my business to hear things, Julian. It is one of the few pleasures left to a cold old bachelor. You are in a very deep hole, and you have been in it a long time, and you have been waiting, have you not, for a certain event that would lift you out of it forever? An event that requires only that I should oblige you by dying. He said it gently, almost kindly, and the gentleness was worse than any accusation shouted. But I have been inconsiderate. I have gone and made a will that gives the greater part of my fortune to a charity, and I have shown no sign of dying at all, and I imagine that has been very trying for you. The room was utterly silent. Julian sat with his mouth a little open, and Ambrose saw him calculating, saw him trying to decide whether this was accusation or merely a bitter cousin's needling, saw the animal caution come up behind his eyes. I don't know what you mean, Julian said, and it came out cracked. No, said Ambrose. I don't suppose you do. Let us leave it. I will not lend you the money. Cousin, you must see that a man who has just been poisoned develops a certain caution about the people who stand to profit by his death. But I will give you one thing, freely, and it is worth more than £11,000. I will give you a warning. Go home, sell what you can. Take yourself abroad where £11,000 goes further and where a man may begin again if he has the stomach for it. Do it soon. Do it before you do something from which there is no going home at all. He rose, ending the interview. That is all the help I can offer a man who wishes me dead. Consider it more than you had any right to expect. Good day. Julian stood. For a moment, one single dangerous moment, the mask fell away entirely, and Ambrose saw what was underneath it, and it was not desperation after all, or not only desperation, it was hatred. Old, curdled, patient hatred, the hatred of a lesser man for a greater who has everything the lesser man believes was owed to him by right of blood. In that moment Ambrose understood that his cousin would not go abroad, would not sell up, would not begin again. Julian Reed would rather see them both in the ground than yield the field, because a man like Julian does not merely want the fortune. He wants Ambrose not to have it. And you cannot buy off a hunger like that, nor warn it away. You can only outlast it, or be devoured by it. You always think yourself so far above me, Julian said very low, and then the mask came back down like a shutter, and he bowed smooth and cousinly, and said in his ordinary voice, I am sorry we could not come to an arrangement, cousin. I hope you keep well. One never knows in this uncertain world how long any of us is given, and he took up his hat and gloves and went. Ambrose stood a long while at the window and watched him go down the steps and along the square and out of sight. Then he became aware that he was not alone. Wren stood in the doorway of the drawing-room. She had heard, he understood. She had been meant to be kept upstairs during the visit, and she had come down anyway, because she was not a woman who could sit in a locked blue room while the man who had poisoned him walked freely below, and he found he was not angry that she had disobeyed. He was glad of her there. That was him, she said. It was not a question. The one who sent the man with the scar. That was my cousin Julian. Heir to everything I have for as long as I have no wife and no child. Yes, he sent Dutton. I have just told him in so many words that I know it. And I have watched him decide that he does not care whether I know it, because he has gone too far into the dark to turn back. He turned from the window. I told him you were gone, turned out drunk into the street and forgotten. He believed it. As long as he believes it, you are safe, because a dead witness is only worth killing if she can still speak. And you? Said Wren. As long as he believes I am gone, you are the only one who knows. Which makes you the one he must silence. She had gone pale, but her voice was steady. You have made yourself the target to keep it off me. He had not thought of it in those terms. He examined it and found it was true, and found that he did not regret it. I am rather harder to poison than a chambermaid, he said. I have a house full of servants I chose myself, and a physician who knows what to look for, and a great deal of practice at trusting no one. Do not distress yourself on my account, Miss Alderley. You are a fool, said Wren Alderley, with a fierceness that startled them both, if you think I will not distress myself on your account. I have spent 3 days in this cold house watching you go about like a man who does not much mind whether he lives, and I minded it before I knew your cousin's name, and I mind it more now. You may be a duke and I may be a chambermaid, but I am not going to stand in a doorway and be calm while you use yourself as bait." Her eyes were bright. "So, we will do this cleverly, and we will do it together, and you will not throw your life away out of some cold notion that it is not worth the keeping. Do you understand me, your grace?" No one had spoken to the Duke of Nordham in such a way in the whole of his adult life. He looked at the small, fierce grey figure in his cold drawing-room, and something in his chest that had been frozen for 6 years cracked, quietly all the way through, and let in a little unbearable warmth. "I understand you," he said. "Perfectly. Then we will do it together. Come and sit down, Miss Alderley, and let us plan how to unmake a murderer." But the road from Fenwick's ballroom to the walled garden was longer and darker than either of them could have known that first night, and it wound, before it was done, through places that tested the Duke of Nordham as no ballroom ever had. In the first days at the town house, before the country and the lodge, there was the matter of proof to be gathered, and Ambrose found that he could not gather it alone. A duke, for all his power, is a clumsy instrument in the world of servants and back passages and whispered gossip. He moves through it like a warhorse through a garden, trampling more than he learns, 'cause everyone he approaches goes silent and stiff and tells him only what they think he wishes to hear. Wren moved through that world like water. She had lived in it her whole life. She knew how to ask a question that did not sound like a question, how to be given the truth by people who did not know they were giving it, and Ambrose, watching her work, understood that the very thing that had made her invisible had also made her the most useful ally he could possibly have found. It began with Thomas, the footman who had carried the poisoned glass. Ambrose had thought to summon him and question him, and had got for his pains. A trembling young man so terrified of being blamed that he could remember nothing at all. It was Wren who found the truth. She went below stairs at the town house, for the servants of Nordham House had by now heard some garbled version of events and regarded her with a wary fascination, and she got herself invited into the servants' hall. And over a pot of tea and an hour of ordinary talk she learned that Thomas had a cousin who was in service at a house where a certain Sergeant Dutton was sometimes seen, and that Dutton was known in the freemasonry of the servants' hall that spans all the great houses of a city as a man who did particular work for a gentleman named Reed, and that the particular work was not the sort a man spoke of, but the sort that made the other servants fall silent when Dutton's name came up. She brought it all back to Ambrose piece by piece, in the mornings, in the pale winter light of the library, and he found himself waiting for those mornings the way a man waits for the one warm hour of a cold day. He would set out the pieces she brought him on the great desk like a man laying out a hand of cards, and together they would turn them and study them and fit them one against another, and slowly, over the days, the shape of the thing emerged, the shape of a plot laid patiently over months. Of Julian's debts and Julian's despair and Julian's slow decision to solve the whole of his ruin with 3 drops in a glass. "You are wasted below stairs," Ambrose said to her one such morning, and meant it as the highest praise he knew. "I have not been below stairs for a week," said Wren, "and I begin to fear I shall be spoiled for it forever." She said it lightly, but there was a shadow behind it, and Ambrose caught the shadow. "You are afraid of what comes after," he said, "when this is done. You have a locking door and a wage that makes your eyes water, and a duke who calls you Miss Alderley. I know none of it is real, none of it can last. And you are guarding your heart against the day it ends, and you are turned back out into the world a chambermaid again with a strange story no one will believe." He said it gently. "Are you not?" She was silent a moment, turning a paper knife over in her fingers. "It is what happens," she said at last, "to girls like me. When great people take them up for a season, they are taken up, and they are useful, and they are set down again, and they are meant to be grateful for the interval and ask no more. I have seen it. I have laid the fires in the rooms where it happened to other girls. I am not complaining, your grace. I have learned not to want things that are not for me, because the wanting is the part that hurts after." Ambrose Vane looked at her a long moment across the desk full of a murderer's secrets. and he understood that she had built her own kind of stone wall brick by brick, exactly as he had built his, and for exactly the same reason, because she had been hurt, and had decided never to be hurt again, and had made herself small and careful and unwanting so that the world could not take from her anything she had not first refused to hold. They were, the cold Duke and the invisible maid, more alike than any two people in England, and the recognition of it went through him like a key turning in a long rusted lock. "Listen to me," he said. "I do not know what I am to you or to myself in the middle of this business, with a poisoner still at large and neither of us able to think clearly for the danger. I will not make you promises in the dark that I cannot see to keep. But I will tell you one thing, Wren Alderley, and you may hold me to it. You are not a girl I have taken up for a season. Whatever else comes, you will never be set down and turned out and told to be grateful. That door will lock for as long as you wish it, and the wage will come whether you serve or not. And if you never wish to see my face again after this is over, you will still be provided for all your life, because you gave me back my life and I do not forget it. That much is not a season's kindness. That much is fixed. Do you believe me?" "I am beginning to," said Wren very low, and did not look up from the paper knife, but he saw that her hands were not quite steady, and he was glad, because it meant that he was not the only one being undone. There was, too, in those town days, the matter of the world, for the story of Fenwick's ball had run through the drawing-rooms of the town like fire through dry grass, and it grew in the telling, as such stories do, until half of society believed the Duke of Nordham had gone mad and taken a wild woman into his house, and the other half believed something a great deal worse and more scandalous. And the great ladies who had for years tried and failed to interest the cold Duke in their daughters found a certain sour satisfaction in supposing that he had finally lost his reason over a chambermaid. Ambrose did not care for himself. He had endured the world's opinion for 6 years and found it weightless. But he found that he cared, ferociously, for what the world said of her, and that its sneering wounded him in a place he had thought long since scarred over. He took her, one bright, cold afternoon, driving in the park. It was a deliberate act, and Wren knew it and paled at it, for the park at the fashionable hour was the very heart of the world's watching. "Your Grace," she said, "you cannot mean to they will see me. They will know me. They will say—" "Let them say," said Ambrose. "I mean them to see you. I mean them to see that the Duke of Nordham drives out the woman who saved his life, openly in the light, in his own carriage, and is proud to do it. If I hide you, Wren, I make you a shameful thing, a secret, a scandal to be whispered. If I show you, I make you what you are, a woman of more courage and more honor than any painted creature in that whole park. And I will not have you hidden as though you were the thing to be ashamed of. Sit up, take my arm, let them stare." And she did. She sat up beside him in the open carriage, in her plain grey gown she had refused, so far, every finer thing he tried to give her, out of a pride he understood and honored, and she took his arm, and they drove the length of the fashionable park at the fashionable hour, and the world stared and whispered, and the great ladies looked down their noses, and the young bloods smirked. And Ambrose Vane, who had not smiled in public in 6 years, turned to the small grey woman at his side and smiled at her, warmly, unmistakably, in full view of all of them, so that not one soul in that park could pretend to doubt what the Duke of Nordham thought of the chambermaid at his side. It was the boldest thing he had done in his life, and it cost him nothing, and it was worth everything, for he felt Wren's arm tremble against his, and then steady, and he heard her draw breath, and when he glanced at her he saw that she was sitting straighter than he had ever seen her sit. Her chin up, her eyes bright, meeting the stares of her betters with a quiet unbowed dignity that made every jewelled woman in that park look cheap beside her. "They are all looking," she murmured. "Let them look their fill," said Ambrose. "They will never see anything half so fine again." The drive in the park did a thing Ambrose had not fully foreseen. It made the danger sharper, for Julian Reed heard of it. Of course Julian heard of everything, where before he had been reassured by Ambrose's lie, that the mad chambermaid was turned out and forgotten. Now the whole town was buzzing that the Duke had driven her openly in the park, that she was no drunken vagrant at all, but a woman he honored, a woman he kept, a woman who had eyes and a memory and a place at the Duke of Nordham's side. And Julian, doing his sums again in the cold, understood that his cousin had lied to him in the drawing room, that the witness lived, that she was not only alive but cherished, and therefore beyond the reach of any private asylum, and that his one hope of safety had narrowed to a single terrible point. Ambrose learned of the change through Grierson, who kept quietly an ear in certain low quarters. A man had been asking questions. A man had been trying to learn the movements of the household at Nordham House when the Duke rode out, and by which door, and whether the grey-eyed woman went with him. And once, on a foggy evening in the last week of November, a stone came the window of the morning room where Wren often sat, and wrapped round the stone was a scrap of paper, and on the paper, in a rough disguised hand, were 4 words, "She shall have gone." Ambrose held the paper a long time by the fire. It was, he understood, both a threat and a confession, a threat against Wren, and a confession that his cousin now knew she lived and knew where she was and had abandoned all pretense. It frightened him more than the poison had, because the poison had been aimed at himself, and a man can be brave with his own life. It is a different and a harder thing to be brave with the life of someone you have come, against all your careful resolutions, to love. He doubled the watch on the house. He forbade Wren the morning room and the park and the front rooms and any window that gave on the street. And she bore it for 2 days and then came to him white with a fury he had not seen in her before. "You are making me a prisoner," she said, "to keep me safe, and I understand it, and I cannot bear it. I sat in a locked blue room the first 3 nights and I was glad of the lock, but this is different. This is you shutting me away in the dark while you walk out into the danger and put yourself between me and every threat, and I will not have it, Ambrose. I did not spill your wine to spend the rest of my life hiding behind a curtain while you are hunted. If we are in this, we are in it together. You said so yourself. I said so before he threw a stone through the window with your death written on it," said Ambrose more harshly than he meant. "Before I understood what it would be to lose you, I have lost one woman I loved to a thing I could not fight, Wren. I sat by her bed for 9 days and I could do nothing, and I swore I would never again be so helpless. And now here is a thing I can fight, a man with a name and a face, and you would have me let you walk out into his aim so that we may be brave together. I cannot. I will not. Do not ask it of me." The words were out before he knew he had said them. "One woman I loved, and now here is a thing," and they hung in the air of the cold library between them, and Wren went very still, and the fury drained out of her face and left something softer and more frightening in its place. "You said loved," she whispered. "You said the woman you loved, and you said now as though—" She stopped. "Ambrose, say what you mean. I have spent my whole life not daring to want things, and I cannot go on standing in your library not daring, while you say things like that and then stop. It is crueler than any lock. Say what you mean or say nothing, but do not do this by halves." And Ambrose Vane, who had faced poison without flinching and would soon face a loaded pistol without a tremor, found that he was afraid, truly afraid. In a way none of the murderers had made him of the small grey woman standing in his library asking him to say what he meant. Because to say it was to hold his heart out in his open hand to a world that had once taken everything from it, and the whole architecture of 6 frozen years stood against the saying of it. He said it anyway. That was the moment, he understood afterward, that he stopped being the coldest man in England, not the ballroom, not the park, but the cold library on that foggy November evening when he chose, deliberately, to be brave in the one way that had always been beyond him. "I mean," he said, and his voice was not steady, and he let it not be steady, "that I love you. I mean that I have been half in love with you, since you told me you were named for a bird, and wholly in love with you since I do not know when, since some morning in this room when I looked up, and understood that I had begun to live for the sound of your step in the passage. I mean that the thought of losing you does not frighten me the way losing a servant or a witness or even a friend would frighten me. It frightens me the way the end of the world would frighten me. That is what I mean. I did not want to mean it. I built 6 years of stone precisely so that I would never mean it about anyone ever again. And you walked across a ballroom and knocked the whole wall down with a glass of wine, and I have been standing in the rubble ever since, cold and exposed and more alive than I have been since I was a young man, and I do not know whether to thank you or curse you for it." He drew a ragged breath. "There, that is what I mean. Now you know, and now I cannot unsay it. and now you understand why I cannot let you walk out into that man's aim. Not because you are a witness. Because you are the only warm thing left in my life, and I have already learned once what it is to watch the warmth go cold, and I would burn down the world before I learned it twice. The library was very quiet. The fog pressed grey against the tall dark windows. And then Wren crossed the room to him. She, who had spent her life keeping her distance, crossed the whole cold space between them, and she took his face in her two small work-roughened hands, and she looked up at him with her eyes full and shining, and she said, "Then we will not lose each other. Do you hear me? Not to your cousin, and not to fear, and not to any wall you build. I love you too, Ambrose Vane. I have loved you since you sat down in a card room so that a chambermaid might sit. And I have gone on loving you through every cold thing you have said to hold me off, because I could see that the coldness was only the scar over a wound, and I am not afraid of a wounded man. I am only afraid of a stone one, and you are not stone. You never were. You only pretended, and you pretended badly, and I saw through you the first night." A tear escaped at last and ran down her cheek, and she laughed at it, half crying. "So, we will do this together, because that is the only way I will do it at all, and we will keep each other alive, and when it is done we will find out what a duke and a chambermaid may be to one another in the plain light of day. But I will not hide behind a curtain while you are hunted. I will not." Do not ask it again. He did not ask it again. He gathered her against him instead, there in the cold library, and held her, tasteful and trembling and complete, with his cheek against her fair hair and her heart beating quick against his own, and for a long while neither of them spoke. Because there was nothing left that needed saying. The fog thickened at the windows. A murderer prowled somewhere out in the grey city with a death threat and a bottle of belladonna. And the Duke of Nordham, holding the woman he loved in the ruins of his 6 years of stone, understood that he had never in his life had so much to lose, nor been so unafraid to risk it, and that the two things were in the end the same thing wearing different faces. It was the next morning, over the cold light and the coffee, that Wren laid out the plan of the lodge, the trap in the winter woods, the false letter, the frightening of Julian into the open, and Ambrose, who had resolved the night before to lock her away from all danger forever, listened to her reason it out with her apothecary's precision, and knew that she was right, and knew that he could not do it without her, and made the hardest choice of his life, to trust the woman he loved to be brave, and to stand at her side in the danger rather than in front of it. Because she had asked him to, and because she was worth trusting, and because love that will not let the beloved be brave is only fear wearing love's coat. "Very well," he said, at the end of it. "The lodge. We do it together. God help us both." "God help your cousin," said Wren Alderley grimly, "for he does not yet know what he has stirred up. He thought he was hunting a lonely cold man who did not much mind whether he lived. He does not know that the cold man has something to live for now, and there is nothing in this world so dangerous as a man who has just remembered he wants to live." There were quieter hours, too, in the town house between the fright of the stone and the journey to the country, and it was in those hours, more than in any moment of danger, that the Duke of Nordham came truly to know the woman he had resolved to love. She would not be idle. That was the first thing. A lifetime of work had made stillness a torment to her, and though he begged her to rest, to read, to sit by the fire and let herself be waited upon for once in her life, she could not do it for long before she was up and finding some occupation mending. Though the house was full of servants to mend, ordering the still-room, which under the last 3 dukes had fallen into a shameful neglect, so that within a week the Nordham still-room smelled of dried lavender and clove, and was ranked with tinctures and cordials in her small neat hand. Teaching the youngest kitchen maid her letters of an evening, because she could not bear, she said, to see a clever child kept ignorant when a quarter-hour a day would open the whole world to her. Ambrose would come upon these small scenes, the Duchess to be of Nordham on a low stool by the kitchen fire, tracing letters in spilled flour for a wide-eyed scullery girl, and he would stand unseen in the doorway and feel his chest tighten with something he had no practice at feeling, and would go away again without disturbing them, and would find that he had been smiling for an hour afterward, without knowing it. "You are making my house strange," he told her once. "My servants sing. I heard the boot boy whistling on the stair this morning." In 6 years no one has whistled in this house. Then it was a very sad house, said Wren, and it is glad now, and you may thank me for it, or you may go about looking cross, but the whistling will continue either way. And she smiled at him over her mending, and he did not look cross at all, and they both knew it. He learned the shape of her mind in those hours, and it was a fine thing, better furnished than that of half the men he sat with in the Lords. She had read everything she could lay hands on in a life with no money for books, had read the labels of her father's jars, and the fly-leaves of borrowed novels, and the discarded newspapers that wrapped the fish. Had built out of scraps and leavings an education that shamed the polished emptiness of the fashionable world. She could reason a problem to its root the way she had reasoned out the trap. She saw people clearly and kindly both at once, which is the rarest of all sight, and she had, beneath the servant's careful quiet, a wit as dry as good sherry, which she had learned to hide, because a servant who is witty is a servant who is dismissed, and which she let out now, cautiously, one small barb at a time, watching to see whether the Duke would take offence, and the Duke, who had not laughed in 6 years, laughed, and asked for more, and got it. "You have been hiding all of this," he said one evening, under a grey gown and a linen cap, "for years, letting the world think you nothing." "The world was more comfortable thinking me nothing," said Wren. "And so was I, for a while. It is safer to be nothing. Nothing is not envied, nor watched, nor blamed. Nothing is left alone." She set down her sewing and looked into the fire. "My father used to say I was born to be somebody, and I loved him for it, but I learned after he died that it is a cruel thing to say to a girl with no fortune. It only makes the being nobody harder to bear. So I decided to be glad of being nobody, and I very nearly managed it until—" She stopped. "Until you saw a man about to drink poison," Ambrose finished quietly, "and could not, being who you are, let him die to preserve your own comfortable nothingness." "Until then," Wren agreed. "And now look, I am somebody after all, and it is every bit as dangerous as my father promised." He would be pleased. He was always more interested in whether a thing was true than whether it was safe. "I think you would have liked him." "I am certain of it," said Ambrose. "He made you. That is recommendation enough for any man." Their danger did not sleep through these gentle hours, for Julian Reed was a hunted man now and knew it, and a hunted man grows reckless. Twice more in that fortnight there were signs of the wolf circling the fold. Once, one of Ambrose's grooms was approached in a tavern by a stranger who offered him gold to leave a certain side door unbolted of a night. And the groom, a solid country man who had served the family 30 years, took gold and came straight to Ambrose and laid it on the desk, and named the man who had given it, and it was Dutton to the life. And once a basket of hothouse fruit arrived at the house with no card, addressed to the Duke, and Wren, who had been an apothecary's daughter before she had been a chambermaid, would not let it into the kitchen, but had it carried straight out to the stable yard, and there, kneeling over it in the cold, she found the tiny puncture in the skin of the finest peach where a needle had gone in, and smelled at the wound the faint sweet almond smell that told her all she needed to know. "He is growing careless," she said, rising from the poisoned basket with her jaw set, "and frightened. Careless and frightened is what we want, but it is also what makes him most dangerous, because a frightened man does not calculate. He lashes out. We must move soon, Ambrose, before he does something wild that catches one of us unready. The lodge. It is time for the lodge." Ambrose looked at her, kneeling in the cold stable yard over a basket of poisoned fruit, having just very possibly saved his life a second time, as steady and clear-eyed as any general he had ever known, and he thought that he had spent his whole life among the great and the titled and the celebrated, and had never once, until a fortnight ago, met a person he considered his equal, and that he had found her at last in a grey gown carrying Lenin down the wrong passage, and that the finding of her was the single piece of good fortune that redeemed the whole of his cold and wasted years. "You have saved me twice now," he said. "Fenwick's ball and this basket. I am keeping a tally, Miss Alderley. I do not know how a man repays a debt that grows faster than he can pay it." "You need not repay it at all," said Wren, wiping her hands on her apron and rising. "That is rather the point of it. I did not lend you your life at interest. I gave it to you both times freely, because I'd not do otherwise and be myself. There is nothing owing." She looked at him, and her grey eyes were very steady and very warm in the cold winter light of the stable yard. "Though if you wished to give me something in return, not in payment, only in kind, you might give me your own life to keep. Not saved from a glass or a basket. Shared, lived alongside. That would be a fair exchange, I think, for a life freely given, another life freely given back." It was as near as either of them had come, in the plain light of an ordinary day, to speaking of what would come after, of marriage, of a shared life, of the thing Ambrose had sworn he would ask her only when the danger was past. And he heard the offer under her words, and the courage it had cost her to make it, she who had spent her whole life not daring to want, and he wanted more than anything in the world to answer it there and then, in the stable yard, over the poisoned fruit. But he had made himself a vow. He would not ask her, would not bind her in the shadow of the danger, when fear and gratitude and the heightened blood of peril might sway her toward an answer she would not give in calmer times. She deserved to choose him freely, in safety, with a clear head and an unhurried heart. So he only took her cold hand in both of his, there in the yard, and pressed it. "Ask me that again on an ordinary safe morning, when there is no poison in the world between us, and you will find me a great deal more eloquent. I have a whole speech prepared. I have been composing it for a week, but I will not spend it on you in a stable yard with belladonna at our feet, because you deserve better than a proposal made in the middle of a murder, and I mean to give you better, or die trying." "Then do not die trying," said Wren, and smiled, though her eyes were bright, "for I should very much like to hear the speech. Come, it is cold, and we have a lodge to prepare and a murderer to unmake, and after all of it, God willing, an ordinary safe morning to look forward to." And she tucked her hand into his arm, and they went in together out of the cold, and behind them a stable boy took the basket of poisoned fruit away to be burned, and the grey winter afternoon closed down over the great house where, against every expectation of its cold master, a fire had been lit at last that would not go out. They made a strange council, the Duke and the chambermaid, bent over the same table in the library through the short dark afternoons of that November, and Ambrose could not afterward have said when it stopped feeling strange and became the only part of his day he waited for. The difficulty, they agreed, was proof. Ambrose knew in his bones and in his reason that Julian had ordered the poisoning, but a duke's certainty is not evidence, and a chambermaid's sight of a man in green livery, however clear, would be torn to ribbons by any barrister worth his fee. Wren had seen Dutton pour something into a glass. She had not seen Julian give the order. There was no ledger, no letter, no confession, only a scarred old soldier who would die before he betrayed his master, and a master too careful to have put anything in writing. To bring Julian to justice they would need to make the invisible thread between Dutton and Reed visible. They would need Julian himself to reach for the poison a second time, in a manner they could witness and prove. "He will try again," Ambrose said. "Grierson said it, and my own reason confirms it. The question is not whether, but how and when, and there we have an advantage, because a man who has failed once grows impatient, and impatient men are careless." "He thinks you suspect nothing," Wren said slowly, turning it over in the way he had come to watch for, the apothecary's daughter measuring out a problem like a dose. "He thinks the only witness is drunk in a gutter somewhere and forgotten, so he thinks himself unwatched. If we could make him believe he had a clear opportunity, a moment when you were vulnerable and unsuspecting, and he was unobserved, then he would take it," Ambrose finished, "and we should be there to see him take it. Yes, but it must be a moment he trusts. He will not walk into anything that smells of a trap. He knows the town house is full of my own servants. He will not try here. It must be somewhere he believes I am careless, somewhere I go without guard, out of habit, where he might contrive to be present." They found it in the end in his own life. Ambrose kept in the country, a small hunting lodge at the edge of the Nordham lands, a plain old place of dark beams and few rooms where the great cold formality of the court did not reach, and where he had gone, alone every winter since Cassandra died, for a fortnight of solitude and cold air and the mercy of no company at all. It was known. Julian knew it had been raised partly at the court, knew all the family's habits. Ambrose went to the lodge each December with a single manservant and a cook, no guard, no ceremony. a duke stripped down to a private man in an isolated house in the woods. If Julian meant to strike unobserved, there could be no likelier ground. "I will let it be known that I go to the lodge as usual this year," Ambrose said. "Earlier than usual, in fact next week. A man shaken by a poisoning, retreating to lick his wounds in solitude. Julian will hear of it. And he will understand that at the lodge I am softer than I have been. No household, no physician, no witnesses. If he is going to move again, that is where he will do it, and we will be ready for him." "And I will be there," said Wren. "You will not." He said it more sharply than he intended. "You will be here, in the townhouse, behind a locked door, where you are safe. If Julian learns you are alive, he will do nothing, because he will not learn it, because I will not be Miss Alderley there. I will be a maidservant at your lodge, of which you will need one, since you cannot very well spring a trap without witnesses to spring it before, and the fewer people you bring into this, the safer we all are." She met his glare without flinching. "I know how a poison is prepared and how a servant behaves who means to do murder, better than any man you could hire. I saw Dutton do it once, and no one else in that ballroom saw it at all. You need my eyes, your grace. You have said so yourself. You cannot want them and forbid them in the same breath. It is too dangerous. Everything is too dangerous. It was too dangerous to spill your wine. I did it anyway, and I am glad." She leaned across the table, and the candlelight was warm on her face, and Ambrose was aware, with a pang that was becoming familiar, of how much he did not want her anywhere near a scarred old soldier with a bottle of belladonna in his coat. "Let me tell you a thing about myself, your grace. I have spent my whole life being overlooked. It is the great skill of a chambermaid to be in the room and not be seen, to move through the lives of the great and be less noticed than the furniture. I hated it once. I was a clever girl, and it galled me to be furniture. But I understand now that it is a weapon. No one watches a maid. Dutton did not watch me at Fenwick's, though I stood not 10 feet away, because I was a maid, and maids are furniture. That blindness will kill him if you let me use it. So use it." Ambrose Vane looked at her a long moment. He had spent his life among people who wanted things from him and had learned to guard against every kind of want, and he had no defense at all against this, a person who wanted only to help him, and who was right, and who was braver than he was. It undid him a little more each time. "Very well," he said at last, roughly, to cover what he felt. "You will come as a maidservant. You will keep to the kitchen and the passages, and you will watch, and you will not, under any circumstances, put yourself between me and anything. When the moment comes you will bear witness and no more. Do you swear it?" "I swear it," said Wren, and he knew, even as she said it, that she was lying, and that if it came to a choice between his life and her safety, she would choose his life exactly as she had chosen it in Fenwick's ballroom, and that there was nothing he could do to prevent it except Mary's sure it never came to that. It frightened him more than Julian did. They went down to the country 3 days later. And it was in those 3 days the journey, the settling of the plan, the long hours in the swaying carriage with the frozen fields sliding by outside, that the thing between them stopped being gratitude and became something Ambrose no longer had a name for that did not alarm him. He told her about Cassandra. He had not spoken her name aloud in 6 years, and he told Wren the whole of it as the carriage rocked through the December dusk, how he had married for love, young and certain, and how she had died in her second winter as his wife of a fever that took her in 9 days, and how he had held her hand at the last and felt it cold in his, and had decided in the madness of grief that he would never again let anything close enough to be lost, how he had dismissed the household who had known them happy, because he could not bear to be looked at with pity, how he had made himself into stone on purpose, brick by brick, and how the stone had worked so well that he had frightened even himself, and how he had woken one recent morning and been unable to remember the last time he had felt anything at all, and had not much minded. Which was the most frightening thing of all. Wren did not offer him comfort. That was the mercy of her. She did not say the things people say. She only listened, in the swaying dark, with her hands folded in her lap, and when he had finished she said quietly, "She would not have wanted you to turn to stone. No one who loved you would want that." And then, after a silence, "You felt something when I seized your arm. I saw it in your face. You had forgotten you could, and it frightened you. That is why you were so cold to me at first," said Ambrose, because there was no point in lying to her. She saw him too clearly. "You are the first thing in 6 years that has made me glad to be alive." "I do not know what to do with that, Miss Alderley. I am out of the habit of gladness." "Then we will get you back into the habit," said Wren Alderley, "when your cousin is undone and it is safe to be glad. Until then, we will keep you alive, which is the first requirement of gladness." And she smiled at him in the dark, a real smile, the first he had drawn from her, and the Duke of Nordham thought that he would face a dozen poisoners for the sake of seeing it again, and understood, with a kind of quiet terror, that he had fallen in love with a chambermaid, and that it was the least foolish thing he had done in 6 years. The lodge stood in a fold of the winter woods, a low dark house of old beams and small deep windows, wood smoke standing straight up from its chimneys into a sky the colour of pewter. Ambrose had loved it once for its bleak solitude, for being the one place on his lands where nothing was expected of him. Now, watching Wren cross its threshold in the plain brown gown of a country servant, her fair hair bound up under a linen cap, he found that the solitude he had prized felt suddenly like the loneliest thing he had ever chosen, and that the small dark house was warmer with her in it than it had ever been in all his years of coming here alone. He had brought only 2 others, Barrow, his manservant, an old close-mouthed soul who had served him since before Cassandra, and was the one member of his household he trusted without reserve, and a cook from the village who knew nothing and would be sent home before the danger came. Barrow knew everything. Barrow had been told the whole of it, and had received it with the flat, unsurprised calm of a man who had long suspected Master Julian would come to no good, and had quietly begun to sleep across the door of Ambrose's chamber with an old service pistol under his pillow. And they waited. Ambrose let it be known, through the careful indiscretion of a note to his man of business and a word to a talkative neighbour, that he was at the lodge, alone as ever, low in his spirits, seeing no one. He walked out each day along the frozen rides as he always did, deliberately, without a guard, a solitary figure in a dark greatcoat against the white, and he knew himself watched, felt it, the way a hunted thing feels the eyes on, and did not look for the watcher, because to look would be to warn. It was Wren who found the thread. She came to him on the 4th evening, quick and quiet, in the low firelit parlour, and her face was pale under the linen cap. "There is a new man in the village," she said. "Come 3 days ago. Taken a room at the inn, and says he is a traveller waiting on a coach that never comes. Tall, older, grey at the temples, and a scar, your grace, below the left eye." I did not go near him. I only heard the inn girl speak of him when I went down for the eggs, and I asked, careless as anything, what he was like, and she told me, and it is Dutton. He is here. He has been here since before we came, so it had begun. Ambrose felt the cold clarity settle over him that he had felt at Fenwick's, the stillness of a man in danger. Then Julian sent him ahead, he said, to wait and watch and find the moment. Dutton is the hand. He will do the thing itself, so that Julian's own hands stay clean and Julian himself stays 100 miles off, with a dozen witnesses to swear he was at his club in town when I died. He looked into the fire. It is well done. If Dutton poisons me here alone and vanishes, who is there to connect a wandering stranger at a country inn to a gentleman in London? Julian inherits, mourns handsomely, and is never so much as questioned. He is cleverer than I gave him credit for, or Dutton is. Then we must have Julian himself, Wren said. Dutton alone is not enough. Even if we take Dutton in the act, he will say nothing and hang alone, and Julian will be free and rich and will only wait a year and try again by another hand. You said it yourself, we must make the thread visible. We must have Julian here, reaching for the poison with his own will, where you can prove it was his doing and not merely a stranger's. She was right, and Ambrose had known it, and had not wanted to face what it required. There is only one thing that would bring Julian himself to the lodge, he said slowly. One thing that would make him abandon his careful distance and come in person, if he believed the plan had gone wrong. If he believed Dutton had failed or been taken, or that I had discovered the plot and meant to expose him, if he believed that his only escape was to come and finish it himself quickly before I could act. Fear would bring him. Nothing else would. Then we frighten him, said Wren. They laid it that night, the 3 of them, the Duke and the chambermaid and the old manservant, heads together in the low firelight, and it was a cold and dangerous thing they laid, and Ambrose liked no part of the danger to her, and could find no way to do it without her. Because the whole of it turned on the one weapon Julian would never think to guard against, a servant no one saw. The plan was this. Wren, in her character as a country maidservant, would contrive to be sent into the village on an errand, and there, careless and gossiping as maidservants are, she would let fall to the inn-girl, who told everything to everyone, and thus in time to the grey-haired stranger who had taken a room that His Grace the Duke had received a strange letter from town that had thrown him into a black fury. That His Grace had been heard to say he had been betrayed by his own blood, and would ride to London within the week to lay the whole matter before a magistrate and see a certain gentleman hang. That His Grace kept the damning letter locked in his writing desk at the lodge and would take it to town as his proof. There was no letter, there was no magistrate, but Dutton would carry the tale to Julian by the fast post, and Julian, hearing that his cousin knew, that his cousin had proof, that his cousin meant to ride to London and hang him within the week, Julian would understand that his careful, patient scheme had collapsed, that Dutton's slow, watchful waiting had run out of time, that his only hope was to strike now, at once, and to strike so that no letter and no ride to London could ever happen, and a man in that extremity, Ambrose judged, would not trust the deed to Dutton alone a second time. He would come himself, to be sure of it, to see the damning letter destroyed, and the damning cousin silenced with his own eyes. Fear would bring him where greed had kept him safely distant. And when he comes, Ambrose said, he will come believing me unwarned and unguarded, a man in a fury preparing to leave for London, careless in the last hours before he means to destroy his enemy. He will find a way in Dutton, will find it for him. And he will reach for the poison, or the knife, or whatever ending he has chosen, and Barrow and I will be waiting, and there will be witnesses this time, and it will be his own hand, and it will be enough. And I said, Wren will be the one who lets him think the way is clear. Which means I will be the one nearest to Dutton, and to whatever Julian brings. She said it quietly. You knew that when you made the plan. That is why you look as though it costs you. I will find another way, Ambrose said low. I will not spend you to buy him. You are not spending me. I am spending myself, which is my own to spend, and I choose to spend it on keeping you alive, because she stopped. The firelight was warm on her face. Barrow, with the delicacy of an old servant, had found something to attend to at the far end of the room. Because I find I cannot bear the thought of a world with you gone out of it, your grace, and I did not know that until this room, and I am not sorry to know it, whatever comes. She lifted her chin in the way he had come to love. So we will do it my way, and you will let me stand where I must stand, and you will trust me to be brave, 'cause I have been brave once already, and I did not fail you. Ambrose Vane crossed the little room and took both her small work-roughened hands in his, there in the firelight, with old Barrow tactfully deaf at the window, and he did the thing he had not done in 6 years and had thought he never would again. He brought her hands to his lips and held them there, and let her feel how his own were not quite steady. When this is done, he said, when Julian is undone and you are safe and there is no more poison in the world between us, there is a thing I mean to ask you. Wren Alderley, that a duke has no business asking a chambermaid, and that I am going to ask you anyway. Because I have been stone for 6 years and I am done with being stone. But I will not ask it now, with a murderer in the village, because I will not have you say yes out of fear or danger, or the heat of the moment. I want you to say it in the plain cold light of an ordinary safe morning, or not at all. Do you understand me? I understand you, whispered Wren, and her eyes were bright, and she did not pull her hands away. Then keep yourself alive, your grace, so that you may ask me. That is all I want. Keep yourself alive. Outside in the frozen dark of the winter woods, a grey-haired man with a scar below his eyes stood a long time among the black trees, watching the small warm lights of the lodge, and then turned and went back down the lane toward the village and the fast post to London, carrying a lie that would bring his master to his ruin. Yet the winter woods nearly undid them before Julian ever came, and the dark hour of it fell not on the Duke but on Wren, and Ambrose came within a hair of losing the very thing he had gone into the wilderness to protect. It happened on the second day at the lodge, before they knew Dutton lay waiting in the village. Wren, in her character as a country maidservant, had gone out at dusk to the well in the yard to draw water, a small ordinary errand of the kind a servant does 100 times without thought. The light was failing. The woods stood black and close about the little house, and Ambrose, glancing up from his papers at the small deep window, saw a thing that stopped the breath in his throat, a shape detaching itself from the darkness of the trees at the edge of the yard. A tall grey shape moving with a soldier's silent economy toward the small unguarded figure at the well. He was out of the door before he had thought. He crossed the yard at a dead run, shouting her name, and Dutton, for it was Dutton, come 3 days early to study the ground and unable to resist. Seeing the witness alone in the dusk, the chance to solve at a stroke the one loose thread that troubled his master, Dutton turned, and saw the Duke bearing down on him, and made the cold professional's calculation and abandoned the girl and melted back into the black woods before Ambrose could reach him. But the fright of it, the near thing of it, shook Ambrose to his foundations, for he had seen, in the one frozen instant before Dutton fled, the glint of a blade in the old soldier's hand, and he understood how close he had come, not to danger to himself, which he could bear, but to finding Wren dead in the yard of his own refuge, killed while he sat 2 rooms away reading papers by candlelight. He reached her and caught her by the shoulders, and she was white and shaking, for she had seen the shape come and had frozen, the way even the bravest freeze, and had known in that instant that she was about to die. And Ambrose held her there in the freezing dusk and felt her tremble against him and felt his own heart slamming like a fist against his ribs, and something broke loose in him, the last of the careful control, the last of the cold reason, and he heard himself saying, over and over into her hair, "I nearly lost you, I nearly lost you, I sat there with my papers and I nearly lost you," in a voice he did not recognize as his own. That night he told Barrow to bar every door and every shutter, and he sat up the whole night through in a chair outside the door of the little room where Wren slept, with his father's sword stick across his knees, and he did not close his eyes once. And somewhere in the small hours, listening to the wind in the frozen trees and the quiet breathing of the woman he loved beyond the thin wall, the Duke of Nordham came to the edge of a decision that nearly ruined everything. He decided to send her away. He would send her back to the townhouse. He resolved, under Barrow's guard, out of the woods, out of the danger, and he would stay at the lodge alone and spring the trap alone and take the risk alone as he had first intended, because the near thing at the well had shown him what he could not bear. And he would rather face Julian without her eyes than face the world without her in it. He would take the danger onto himself entire. It was, he told himself through that long cold night, the only honourable thing, the only loving thing. He told her in the grey of the morning, and she heard him out to the end, and then she said, very quietly, "No, no, listen to me, Ambrose, and hear it this time, because I will only say it once. If you send me away, you will die." She said it flat and certain, the apothecary's daughter measuring the dose of a truth. "You will spring your trap alone, and there will be no one to see what Dutton does, no one who knows a poison from a posset, no one whose eyes Julian will not think to guard against, and you will make some small mistake that you cannot see because you are inside it, and you will die, and I will spend the rest of my life knowing that I let you send me to safety while you walked alone into a thing I might have prevented. Do you understand what you are asking of me? You are asking me to save my own skin by leaving you to die. You are asking me to be the kind of person who would have let you drink the wine at Fenwick's rather than make a spectacle of herself." Her eyes blazed. "I am not that person. I proved I was not that person the first night we met, and you fell in love with the person I proved myself to be. So do not now ask me to become the other kind to spare you a fear. It is the one thing I cannot give you. Anything else, not that." Ambrose Vane stood in the grey morning light with the whole architecture of his fear laid bare before him, and he saw that she was right. And he saw more than that. He saw that to send her away to safety against her would be to do to her exactly what the world had always done to her. To decide for her, to make her small and safe and voiceless, to treat her courage as a thing to be managed rather than honoured. It would be to love her the way he had loved his stone walls, as a possession to be guarded rather than the way she deserved to be loved, as a person to be trusted. And he understood, standing there, that the deepest cowardice of his life would not be to face Julian's poison, but to refuse the woman he loved the right to be brave beside him, because his own fear could not bear it. "You are right," he said at last, and the words cost him more than any he had ever spoken. "God forgive me, you are right. I have spent 6 years believing that the way to keep a thing safe is to lock it away and let nothing near it, and I made myself a tomb doing it, and I have just this moment tried to make a tomb of you. I will not do it. We stay together. We spring the trap together. And if it goes wrong," his voice caught, "if it goes wrong, we will at least have gone wrong as ourselves, and not as two cowards each hiding behind the other. Forgive me for asking. I will not ask again." "There is nothing to forgive," said Wren, and came to him and laid her head against his chest. And he wrapped his arms around her, and for a long moment they simply stood so, in the grey dawn light of the little lodge, two people who had each spent a lifetime alone and had found, impossibly, in the middle of a murder, the one other soul who understood the shape of that loneliness. "You were only afraid. I know what it is to be afraid of wanting a thing for fear of the losing of it. We are the same in that, you and I. But we are done with it now. We will want things bravely from now on, both of us, and take the risk of the losing, because the not wanting is a worse death than any poison." She tilted her face up to him. "Now, let us finish this, so that we may begin the wanting in earnest." And so it was, chastened and resolved and closer than ever, that they laid the last of the trap, the false letter, the frightening of Julian, the long cold wait, and it was 3 nights later that Julian Reed came at last through the frozen woods to his ruin, driven by the fear that Wren had reasoned out with such deadly precision, walking into the very extremity they had prepared for him. The near thing at the well had taught Ambrose what he stood to lose. The grey morning had taught him to trust the woman he loved to stand beside him. And when the latch of the kitchen door lifted softly in the dark, and the whole long hunt came down at last to a single splintered moment of candlelight and violence, and a pistol swinging between his heart and hers, the Duke of Nordham was ready, not the cold stone man who had lifted a glass at Fenwick's ball with nothing to live for, but a man who had everything to live for, and who had learned at the 11th hour that the bravest thing a frightened heart can do is to stop hiding and stand, open and unshielded and unafraid, beside the one it loves. Julian came on the 3rd night after, which was sooner than even Ambrose had reckoned, and told him more plainly than any confession how deep the fear had bitten. A patient man would have taken a week to arrange himself an alibi and study the ground. Julian came in 3 days, driving through the dark from London in a hired chaise he left at a crossroads 2 miles off, coming the last miles on foot through the frozen woods with Dutton, because a frightened man cannot bear to wait. They knew he was coming. Wren had seen the grey-haired stranger settle his account at the inn that morning, and had understood what it meant, and had brought the word back to the lodge white-faced and steady, and the 3 of them had made their last cold preparations, and then done the hardest thing of all, which was to wait through the long afternoon and the longer dusk with everything ready and nothing to do but listen to their own hearts. Ambrose had sent the village cook home. He sat now in the low parlour in his shirt-sleeves with a branch of candles and his writing desk open before him and a bottle of wine at his elbow, exactly as a careless, furious man preparing to leave for London might sit, apparently absorbed in his papers, apparently alone, apparently unguarded. The desk drawer stood a little open, and in it lay a folded paper sealed and docketed to look, to any watcher at the window, like the damning letter that did not exist. His back was to the door. It was the most exposed he had ever deliberately made himself, and it went against every hardened instinct of his nature, and he did it because Wren was right that the trap could not close unless the bait looked real. Barrow was in the dark of the passage beyond, the old service pistol primed and cocked in his steady old hand. And Wren, against everything Ambrose wanted, and with everything the plan required, Wren was in the kitchen at the back, where a maidservant would be. Near the door Dutton would judge the easiest way in, positioned to see and to warn, and Ambrose had made her swear again, to do nothing more. The wind moved in the chimney, a log settled, and then so softly that a man not straining for it would never have heard. The latch of the kitchen door lifted. Ambrose did not turn. He kept his eyes on his papers, his quill moving, his whole body arranged in a lie of unawareness, while every nerve in him screamed. He heard the door ease open. He heard the small betraying creak of a floorboard in the passage, once, then a pause, then again 2 men, moving with the care of men who mean murder. He heard, very faintly, the whisper of cloth, and he understood, with a plunging cold horror, that they had come in through the kitchen. That they were in the kitchen now. That between the 2 of them and the parlour where he sat as bait lay a small back room with a maidservant in it who no one thought worth guarding. He was on his feet before he had decided to move. What happened then happened very fast, and Ambrose lived it afterward in fragments, the way violence is always lived. He was through the parlour door and into the dark passage with a candle in one hand and his father's old sword stick in the other. He heard, from the kitchen, a scuffle, a chair going over, a stifled cry that was Wren's, a man's low curse, and he came round the passage corner and into the kitchen doorway and saw it all in the one leaping instant of candlelight. Dutton, grey and scarred, with one hard hand clamped over Wren's mouth and the other twisting her arm cruelly up behind her, her cap knocked askew and her fair hair come loose, her eyes above the smothering hand wide and fixed on Ambrose in warning, and behind them in the doorway from the yard, Julian Reed. Bottle green coat and white face and a small pistol in his shaking hand, and on the deal table between them a dark bottle, unstoppered, and a glass. Julian saw him. Julian saw Ambrose alive and standing and armed and unsurprised, and understood in that instant that there was no letter, that there had never been a letter, that the whole thing was a trap and he had walked into it, and his face went from white to a terrible grey, and the pistol came up. "You," Julian said, and his voice cracked entirely. You knew and you it was all." "Let her go, Julian," said Ambrose very quietly, very steadily, and did not look at the pistol pointed at his heart, but only at his cousin's ruined face. "It is finished. There are witnesses in this house you have not seen. Whatever you do now, you cannot make it not have happened. Let the girl go and put down the pistol, and it need not end with your neck in a noose. Run if you like. I will not chase you tonight, but let her go." "I'll not hang," said Julian, wild now past reason, the pistol swinging between Ambrose and the small figure Dutton held. "I'll not if I hang. Cousin, you'll go first, I swear it." And his finger whitened on the trigger, and in that splintered half-second Ambrose saw that Julian meant it, meant to fire, and there was no time to reach him and no time to do anything at all, except that Wren, who had sworn to do nothing, who had never in her life kept such a promise when a life she cared for was at stake, drove her heel down hard onto Dutton's instep and threw her whole small weight sideways, and the old soldier, caught off balance, staggered a half step, and his grip loosened. And Wren tore her mouth free and screamed, "Down, Ambrose, down," and flung herself not away from the danger but into it, into Julian's arm, knocking the pistol wide as it fired. The shot went into the ceiling. The flash and the roar filled the small stone room, and then everything came at once. Barrow in the passage doorway with his pistol level and his old voice, like iron, "Hold, sir, or by God I'll drop you where you stand." Dutton lunging for the fallen glass, and Ambrose bringing the heavy sword stick down across the old soldier's wrist, so that he cried out and the glass shattered on the flags. Julian scrabbling for his dropped pistol, and Ambrose's boot coming down on it, and Ambrose's other hand closing in the collar of the bottle green coat and hauling his cousin up bodily against the wall, and Wren, on her among the broken glass, gasping, alive, her hand pressed to a bleeding graze along her arm where Dutton's nails had torn her, alive. "It is finished," Ambrose said again into his cousin's face, and this time it was true, and Julian heard that it was true. And all the wild fight went out of him at once, and he sagged in Ambrose's grip and began horribly to weep, not from remorse, Ambrose understood, but from the pure animal grief of a cornered creature that has finally run out of ground. "It is finished, Julian. You are taken. Dutton is taken. There is a manservant, an A." He could not for a moment find the word for what Wren was, a witness of unimpeachable character who has seen it all, and the bottle and the glass. "You will not be 8th Duke of Nordham. You were never going to be. You would have done better to sell your paper and go abroad, cousin, as I told you, and lived out your days poor and free. Instead you have this." It ended, as such things end, in the ordinary machinery of the law that the great can set in motion when they choose. The nearest magistrate was Ambrose's own neighbour, a hard, fair old man, and he came at dawn and took Julian Reed and the man Dutton into custody, and the bottle was proven belladonna by Grierson brought express from town. And the whole cold plot was laid bare in an assize court, in the spring the poisoned wine at Fenwick's, the failed murder, the second attempt in the winter woods, the £11,000 of gambling debt that had driven a weak man to it, all of it. Dutton, faithful to the last in the wrong cause, said almost nothing and hanged for it. Julian, faithful to nothing, said a great deal in the hope of mercy and received a little transportation for life to the far side of the world, which the merciful old judge, looking on the ruin of a gentleman, allowed him in place of the rope. He sailed in June. Ambrose did not go to see him off. But he sent quietly, through his man of business, a sum that would keep his cousin from starving in that far place, because Cassandra would have wished it, and because a man who has been given back his life can afford to be generous even to the man who tried to take it. And then it was over, and the world was safe, and it was an ordinary morning. It was, in fact, a morning in late April, mild and green, with the light coming golden across the lawns of Nordham Court, and the first roses breaking against the old stone. Ambrose found Wren in the walled garden, where she had taken to going in the safe, quiet weeks since the assizes, among the herbs and the physic beds that reminded her, she said, of her father's still-room. She wore a gown of soft green now, well made and her own, and her fair hair was loose in the sun, and she was no longer a chambermaid and no longer in disguise and no longer afraid, and she was, Ambrose thought, watching her from the arch of the gate before she saw him, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life. And he had once thought himself a connoisseur of beauty in the cold years when he had felt nothing at all. She looked up and saw him and smiled, and it went through him like the first warm day after a long winter. "You said," Ambrose began, and found to his astonishment that his voice was not quite steady, though he had faced a loaded pistol without a tremor. "You said in the lodge that I was to keep myself alive so that I might ask you a thing in the plain cold light of an ordinary safe morning. Well, here is the morning. It is ordinary and it is safe, and there is no poison in the world between us, and I have kept myself alive, chiefly because you would not let me do otherwise." He crossed the garden to her, over the warm grass, and he took her hands that had spilled his wine and saved his life, and thrown themselves between him and a bullet, and he held them. He did not let them go, as he had not let them go since the first night in Fenwick's ballroom. "I have been a cold man," he said, "and a hard one, and I made myself so on purpose, because I was afraid, and I have never told any living soul that until you walked across a room full of people who despised you to save the life of a stranger who could not even trouble himself to want it. You have taught me, Wren Alderley, that a life is worth the caring for, and that a heart of stone is not safety but a slow death, and that I would rather be broken open and alive than whole and frozen. I love you. I have loved you since you told me your mother named you for a bird that would not be still, and I am asking you a duke asking a chambermaid, and I do not care who is scandalized by it, and any who are may go hang. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my duchess, and the warmth in this cold old house, for as long as we are both given?" For a moment Wren could not speak. Her eyes filled and shone and did not spill, in the way he had come to know. And then she laughed, a small breathless laugh that was half a sob, and she said, "You great foolish man, did you truly wait all these weeks to ask me, when I have known the answer since the winter woods?" She lifted his hands as he had once lifted hers, and pressed them to her wet cheek. "Yes. Yes, of course, 1,000 times yes. Not because you are a duke I would have you if you were the apothecary's poor apprentice, and I still the girl grinding the powders. Because you are Ambrose who let himself be warm again, and that is the bravest thing I ever saw a man do, braver than facing any pistol." She smiled up at him through her tears. "Yes." He kissed her then, at last, in the walled garden with the roses breaking around them, and the golden light lying warm across the old grey stones, gently, as a man kisses a thing he has been given back from the very edge of losing, and when at length they drew apart. The Duke of Nordham, who had not danced in 6 years, who had turned his household to strangers and his own heart to stone, stood in the sunlight with his chambermaid in his arms and laughed aloud, a real laugh, rusty from long disuse, and Wren laughed with him, and old Barrow, watching unseen from a window of the house, wiped his eyes with the back of a gnarled hand and went to tell the kitchen that they had best begin, at long last, to prepare for a wedding. They were married that midsummer in the small grey church at the edge of the Nordham lands, without great ceremony, the bride in her green and the Duke without a trace of stone left in his face. The charitable foundation in Cassandra's name was founded after all, larger than he had first intended. And Wren, who knew what it was to be an orphan with an education and no place in the world, took it as her own particular care, so that the widows and orphans of soldiers found in the new Duchess of Nordham a friend who understood them from the inside. And the great cold house grew warm, room by room, year by year, until the ancestors in their gilt frames seemed almost to smile down at the noise and the light and the life of it, and no one who came there afterward ever quite believed that its master had once been called the coldest man in England. He kept all his life upon the wall of his study a single relic of the night it all began, a small square of pale silk, wine-stained the colour of old blood, framed and glazed, that visitors took for some inexplicable eccentricity and never dared to ask about. But Ambrose knew what it was. It was the ruin of a very good waistcoat, and it was the most precious thing he owned, for it was the moment a stranger in grey muslin had cared whether he lived, and spilled a glass and taken his hand and never, from that day to the last of their long life together, let it go.